Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Dumbo from 2019. Like most Disney live-action remakes, this movie is total garbage. But unlike most Disney live-action remakes, this movie is interesting total garbage, and that's somewhat of an improvement. The beginning of this film is a straight, sort of crappier version of Dumbo. In live action, you're telling the whole same story, which is a 64-minute movie or something, and they do it real quick in like 20 or something. I mean, it's way worse, but they do it in like 20-30 minutes. As soon as you get into when Michael Keaton's character shows up and they have like a corporate merger thing, we'll all read into that, but also Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey is a corporate merger. When we get into that section, it becomes a Tim Burton sequel to Dumbo, kind of like Big Top Dumbo. It both makes you wish Tim Burton had directed Big Top Pee-wee and also are glad he didn't direct Big Top Pee-wee. It's kind of weirder and stranger and kind of contradicts what happens at the beginning in sort of an amazing way, because I think one of the biggest problems with this kind of whole Disney live action thing, other than being one of God's creations, which God clearly wanted us to kill right away before the public saw it, but that's like a whole other thing. They always try to examine or reassess the legend of these animated films and give them a time specificity and give it a period that it actually exists in, because who knows when the Jungle Book takes place, or Dumbo I just assumed took place in 1941, or that Lion King doesn't take place in the 1980s, because everybody knows that. But the point is like Dumbo, I didn't know until this movie that what Dumbo was missing was like a World War I backstory, which it totally needed. And which is weird, because you look at all the others and you're like, I mean, I guess Beauty and the Beast makes sense when it takes place, even though I hate that you did that, or that Maleficent takes place at a time, or who cares, when it adds that kind of like giving it more context, because that's like what will make these good or something. And in this, it's like, why is this World War One? I don't get it. Like, what about this story? Like, I haven't read the original story. Maybe the original is all about World War One. I don't know. Like the story that it's based on, because Disney didn't just like come up with it, of course. Then at the beginning, I was really annoyed that they gave it a year and not even like 1941, which, you could have had people coming back from World War II. I think that would have made more sense than like World War One. I don't even understand. Then it seems like when you get to this weird Coney Island land that Michael Keaton runs, which is both supposed to be Coney Island and also doesn't look like Tim Burton's actually been to Coney Island. When you get there, it looks like the 1940s and 50s. So I don't think Burton gives this film an actual specificity. And one of the things I like about what he does is he kind of frees it from being like, hey, look, we made it more logical in live action, is kind of the idea for most of them. And I will say his Alice in Wonderland was not necessarily trying to be Disney's Alice in Wonderland. It was supposed to be Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland, but then we've kind of lumped this in with all that nonsense or something. It's confusing, but this is more of the post Alice in Wonderland kind of Disney adaptations, where he's doing it more in that vein. In some ways, I think since he is the only one who's directed one of these who was an actual Disney animator, seems to sort of understand how to do it more visually, understands how to cast it really well, having like a nice Batman Returns kind of reunion there, having some interesting character actors with Danny DeVito and Michael Keaton being in this, and even like a great scene with Alan Arkin, Danny DeVito, and Michael Keaton. And he seems to be having more fun with it than I've ever seen a director really have with this. Not that it's like good or the best one, because that's Pete's Dragon and then a bunch of losers, but he kind of tries, but he tries in that late career Burton way where he gets a few people back who aren't Johnny Depp, and you're kind of just exuberant because you're like, oh my god, I'm getting a piece of Tim Burton, Michael Keaton again. And you do, especially at the beginning. I was so into it. I was so into him being that kind of role, but I didn't think about how it felt like he was sort of out of practice of doing that Michael Keaton, and just frankly not as great. Like, you get sick of him. Danny DeVito is pretty consistently amazing, especially at the beginning. Is just playing full character actor awesomeness. Danny DeVito, the Danny DeVito we all love. Frankly, it's almost like he's the real heart of this movie, because that's the other thing. This is not like a Dumbo movie. This is like a Godzilla movie in which you have to sit through a bunch of boring ass people stuff to see a giant monster destroy stuff and be, a metaphor for America and things. And in Dumbo, like, this kid's an inventor, like Colin Farrell's her dad, and he was in World War I, and he has like PTSD and not an arm. And she has a brother who is a kid, I don't know, he likes Dumbo also. And the kids are really bad. I can say that as a father, that you know they're kids, and they're trying their best, and this is probably really intimidating. I can also say that they're the worst things in this fucking movie, and they're awful, and they should not be in this movie. I both think they're written badly and they're bad actors, so it's like a double shot of shit shoved in my fucking face. But the girl, like, there's times where Dumbo will be crying and she'll be like, it's okay, he misses his mom. And I'm like, what? Dude, I knew that little girl. Like, what are you doing right now? Like, she just annoyed me quite frequently, and she was bad at acting. It was like, not only are you written poorly, but you're bad at getting those bad lines to even work. Like, everyone else is like getting this shit to work. You don't really care about those human characters. You want to see Dumbo because, that's what the movie's called and stuff. And he seems more of a compelling character. But Tim Burton seems to not be able to rip himself away from making like a typical Tim Burton sort of movie. And he kind of breaks free of it in some ways, but not really. It's kind of like he's doing it weaving in the same weaving ways he normally does. If he had followed Dumbo and done more of a like motion capture kind of performance with him, like, say, I keep hearing people bring up, Andy Serkis's Caesar is very compelling wise in Dumbo. One, we're looking at the guy who directed, that other Planet of the Apes that we didn't like, if you forgot. And I think this guy can't make that interesting movie where he follows a CGI character. You'd think he could because of his animation background. The interesting thing about doing Dumbo is how economical that screenplay was. And this first feels like two different movies, but also feels like overly long, doesn't really understand its point, follows certain characters and then drops them for other characters, kind of is with the kid but isn't. I just don't really think it has a real perspective. It clearly is against mergers, which sure, that's funny for Disney and Fox, but it's like not that funny, so I'm sure they're like, haha, good one, Tim, cool. Whatever, let me just approve this special effect now. And even with Dumbo, when they get rid of his mouse manager, which I think was a bad choice, you don't really get to see him develop as a flying character. You don't get to follow him as much. There's more fighting about the idea and the hit of Dumbo than there is about Dumbo himself. That stuff just doesn't really play very well. And I think, if they had really just done a shot-for-shot remake, it would have been better than this movie, which makes me also wonder why they even do these. And I understand they make money, and that's like how the Disney studio works. They just regurgitate these things over and over again. I do think the second part of this, when they really like go into this weird, crazy world that could never exist, but Tim Burton's gonna have fun with anyway, this movie really starts to come alive and be a little more fun, but at the same time, like, it doesn't even feel like the same movie, and it feels like it's been going on too long and feels too long of them to make some of these points. One of the things I like about the original Dumbo is there's nothing that's really wasted, and this is like there's so many things that are wasted. It feels like they sort of let him go, but they also had a lot of notes to stay within certain parameters. I don't know if they even understand those parameters, and I don't think he knows theory ways where to take Dumbo. It's like kind of interesting what he chose to do with it, and him flying and certain plot points and things. I don't really think this is like a shining example or kind of a return to form for Tim Burton. It's more just like, oh, this is the kind of Tim Burton-y movies that he makes. Cool, that's what he makes now. These things where we like get a shimmer of him, or maybe just a little sparkle of what he used to be, and we get all excited because we're like, oh man, remember that, remember this. I think that guy is gone. I think it went as far as Mars Attacks, Sleepy Hollow a little bit, and then it's like, it's done. In some ways, he doesn't theory-wise know where to take things. He's kind of an older school. He's not very adaptable. Tim Burton used to be wholly a lot more original, especially since this film is for the most part kind of more of an original film than a Dumbo movie. You think he would have had more fun with it, but he sort of does a little bit but doesn't. He like drops things and then leaves them. It's just like, that's the biggest problem with this movie, is its inconsistency. I just don't find these movies interesting at all, other than Pete's Dragon, on a plot or script level. This is, having the world of tomorrow kind of like, like the end of Mask of the Phantasm sort of stuff in this movie, I thought was cool, but it did feel like Tim Burton kind of going off in his own head. Maybe his own head is a little more interesting. I don't think Dumbo, they went a little too far in clarifying things and making things right and everything like that. And I just wish they'd concentrate more on, like, I have an interesting place to take this character, and I didn't feel that way with Dumbo. I guess I do with the second part, but Dumbo has a little bit of Tim Burton's heart in it. I think he really did care about this a lot more than we think he did. And I think he wanted it to work, but I just don't think it, like, gets that whole, the fun of Tim Burton as much. Like, it's just overly kind of serious, and Tim Burton used to be funny, and you think this would have been a good opportunity for him to be as such, but unfortunately he chooses not to. I don't think this is going to be as interesting as it really should be. We should be talking about Tim Burton getting back together with Michael Keaton and all these things. Just the idea of DeVito and Keaton and then Alan Arkin, you can kind of see Tim Burton trying to reclaim himself, and I'd really like him to have kind of that return kind of movie, but Dumbo isn't it, and it's not going to be able to capture the real magic and what made Dumbo special in the first place. This movie just isn't there to do that. It's there to tell the story of all these people and the logistics wrangling of Dumbo. It's sort of like if you had a whole episode of Entourage about Turtle. That's sort of what this Dumbo is like. I don't think Dumbo was able to both capture the original character and really understand what it was doing and following up in the first place. It kind of just wanted to go off in its own little weird world, and in the end, you kind of wish it had either been like totally more studio controlled or totally auteur driven and different, but this kind of middle ground where it's like, well, it's different, but the studio's got a lot of say in it, and we have an interesting director, sort of makes you kind of just like roll your eyes in disinterest of, like, you had half of too many things, and even that half was like half-assed in itself. So I'm just completely bored by this whole thing. There are certain moments with Keaton and DeVito, with Burton, it feels like he's getting a little more into it, that really pop with this movie. But overall, I don't find it to be that much more than those big pop moments. My experience of watching this movie was like, oh, that's a typical kind of live action experience. This has a time period it takes place in, that's sort of boring. To going like, oh, I'm actually sort of into this, to being like, oh, Keaton's here, I'm really into this, to by the end I'm like, oh, I don't care who's into this at all, I want this to be over. Like, even its goodwill kind of wears off. It really feels like a film that's going to kill any joy or any fun or any interesting ideas, even though it has a ton of them, from even feeling that interesting, because you're kind of like bogged down by this like live action mess that kind of reminds you of a much better movie. I don't think these films become much else other than being like, oh hey, guess what they're not as good as, and kind of makes you want to just rewatch that. So I don't know if that's Disney's master plan or whatever, but in that terms it's working, because I don't think I'll ever really want to watch this again, but I'll want to watch Dumbo from 1941 a lot of times. And I think this film kind of goes within the vacuum of these Disney live action remakes, where you just sit there and think, what was the point of that, and is anyone really going to be referencing that in 6 months, or are we all just going to give this a ton of money or not, or whatever, and just kind of like move on from it. And Dumbo is that kind of empty experience yet again, but with a little heart to it that will just fall down that empty hole and never really come out. So if you've seen Dumbo and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.